Now, today I came across a very interesting clip that I need to share with you guys. Now, this is a lecture by our very own Dr. John Henrik Clarke, teaching us as Black people or African people the necessity of going back to our African customs. This lecture has been chopped and screwed just to reduce the length of the clip, remove the boring parts, and make it a little bit more interesting without leaving out the main information. So without further ado, let's dive into it and see what you guys think about it.
We have already proven that the world need not be in fear when African people are in power. The European has never proven that, and he never will, because his age of grandeur, his age of wealth, was that time when he had millions of people outside of Europe to exploit, when he had invaded other people's country, violated other people's women, taken other people's resources. We have no such picture in our whole history. Very often our children are asking us now, when you explain about slavery and explain about the greatness of Africans in Egypt and in the Niger River, as well as the Nile, if we were so great, why did we lose it? Anytime any people fail to adjust to the nature of change, they lose, no matter who they are. And this is not a racial matter. You can say eventually the great civilizations of Africa fell, but they fell after living 10 times longer than the longest civilization outside of Africa ever lived. Civilizations like people grow tired, and if their energy is not renewed, if their perspective on life is not renewed, if they fail to meet a challenge, then the change of history will change their place in history. Understand one thing very clear, and if you understand it, you can set your clock by it. It's so dependable. The European has never believed in democracy and never will. He has never believed in Christianity and never will. The Christianity he believed in was something he pulled together at the conference at Nicaea, 325 AD. He took an African and an Eastern religion and he Europeanized it, whitened it up, and made it the handmaiden for European world domination. He used it to justify his domination over other people. And he said that people were outside of that religion were free game for slavery. Then, if his God is kind, and if his God is merciful, and if all living things are under his God, no one is free game for slavery, not even those who you think have no soul. I maintain that he did a disservice to the concept of religion, because he took it from old belief systems, he formalized it and dogmatized it and ruined it. Now, if you didn't learn anything else from Godfather 1 or 2, you learned one thing that you need to keep in mind. One thing that you need to practice today: never, absolutely never, let an outsider arbitrate your family disputes. Sober up old drunken Uncle Willie, anybody. So long as it's a member of the family. Because anytime you invite a member of the family to arbitrate your member outside of the family to arbitrate your family disputes, you have confessed a weakness that tells the arbitrator he can enslave you. That's the mistake the Africans made then, and that's the mistake the Africans are still making. If you can't settle your internal disputes, you're fair game for conquerors. Now, what he had to do, the European, in the 15th and the 16th century, he had to make the African forget the kind of societies he built without the Europeans' help and without the Europeans' presence. He had to remove from your historical memory the fact that over half of human history was over before anyone knew that a European was in the world. Societies were built, nations rose and formed, different belief systems came and went, and they didn't have to have walls. Anytime you want to change a belief system in the Western world, you've got to have a holy wall. The same is true of the Arabs in Islam. And we won't get into that. I would need more than a bulletproof vest. And at my age, I don't run so fast. And I'm almost totally blind. So I would need good bodyguards, and I want somebody to watch the bodyguards. Because the bodyguards might be my assassins. Anytime you discuss, take the wraps off religion, and discuss how religion systematically kills something higher than religion, which is spirituality, you be prepared to run. The African societies never said in their commandments, "Thou shalt not." And when you read the original African omissions of purity that foreigners call the 10th Commandments, the foreigners changed the language around. These was omissions. After you study morality, study at the great school of Luxor, you stand before your teacher and say, "I have not violated my neighbor's wife. I have not stolen my neighbor's property." Now foreigners come along, how does he change the language? "Thou shalt not." Look at the dictatorial arrogance. "Thou shalt not." When the Africans gave the teacher the assurance, "I have not." And once these confessions are made, if they're convincing to the teacher, then the teacher passes you to the next higher step of learning. Now some fool comes along and thinks he gave you Christianity, and you had a much better concept all along. I'm saying your problem today is that you think everything in your life must come from outside, and you've forgotten the better things you created, and you didn't give it a name. When you created a concept that Europeans would later call communism, you created great sharing societies. No great millionaires. Now you have a concept in the world that if nations are going to exist, you got to have capitalism. You got to have some people with a whole pile of money touching the sky. And for them to maintain that pile of money, somebody got to be unemployed. They built the pyramids without it. They built the pyramids without an industrial system. So don't let your students say that mathematics is hard. It must have been much harder for those who built the pyramid and they looked like you. You have to go back and look at your own values. Now, I'm not going to insult your intelligence by arguing about whether Egypt was Africa. No more than I would insult your intelligence by arguing about whether your right hand belongs on the same body as your left hand. The Nile Valley, the Nile River, stretches 4,000 miles into the body of Africa. It was the world's first cultural highway. That great amalgam of people coming from the south who had laid the basis for the civilization of Egypt long before the Greeks called it Egypt, brought together the greatest combination of technicians, mentality, thinkers, priests, spiritual leaders the world has ever known. No comparable group of people have ever been assembled in the history of the whole world. And when the area once called the Green Sahara dried up, the technicians of all of this part of Africa began to gravitate toward the Nile. The Nile civilization could feed large numbers of people. It had created massive agriculture. It had created something that if people had enough of them today and enough fresh water, they could survive. The dried bean. One thing about the dried bean, if you store it properly, you can keep it indefinitely. And if you soak it overnight, you can cook it the next day. My point is, we need to pick up some of the attitudes of togetherness that existed in African societies before this disruption coming from Western Asia, mistakenly called the Middle East, because this disruption on African societies coming from Western Asia lasted 2,000 years before the Arabs came. What the brothers who are fascinated with this religion that they have not thoroughly studied, and with the Arab that they do not know at all, because pseudo-whites can be as ruthless as whites, and sometimes more so, is that no invader of Africa did Africa any good. Every invader did Africa more harm than good. And though the Arab was the last massive invader who refused to go home, he too, then and now, does Africa more harm than good. After the Africans and the Arabs had conquered Spain and dominated the Mediterranean from 711 to 1492, the European was pinned into Europe. He had to feed on himself. In the Crusades, he went outside of Europe and discovered there were luxuries outside of Europe he had never heard of. Brocade, silk, perfumes, bath oils. Now, what did happen to you in the 15th and the 16th century. The Europeans colonized most of the world, colonized history, colonized information about history and information about the world, propagated a concept that the world waited in darkness for Europeans to bring the light. When everywhere he went in the world, he put out the light. And he destroyed civilizations that were old before Europe was born. He did not do the world any favor. He did not spread any civilization because he had no civilization to spread. Mechanization is not civilization. Civilization has nothing to do with whether you have a flush toilet or not, or whether you wear a pair of shoes. I'm not saying go without shoes. It's very convenient to have a pair of shoes. But do not think that that makes you civilized. We must have a broad, holistic view about African people and their place in the history of the whole world. Without us, this world would not be where it is. Without us, there would have been no British Empire. Without us and what was taken away from us, there would be no Wall Street. Without us, there would be no financial empire in America because they would not have had the funds to bring it about. We have to look at the significance of our significance. We have to make claims over and above that of others. We must prepare our children to rule the state. Because the one thing people take away from you when they oppress you, they take away the memory of what you were before they interrupted your society. They know what you are not quite clear about today. You can never successfully oppress a consciously historical people, because a consciously historical people will not let it happen. Some of them will stand up and say, "Look, fool, when you were in the caves of Europe cutting your brothers' throats over dried bones, I was sitting on thrones of pure gold. I belong to the senior branch of the human race. I started it all." Then, reading our history carefully, it must start in the home, then in the schools. And the church can do a little less preaching and a little more teaching. The church can be lighted more times than the weekends. Have tutoring sessions in the church, athletic sessions in the church, history lessons in the church, sewing lessons in the church, language courses in the church. The church must be a holistic servant of the total community and not just a weekend thing where people go to show off a new dress. We gave the world concepts of the humane relationship of man and woman that the world lost and have not regained to this day. And once we associate ourselves with foreigners, fakers, and fools, we take on the traits of foreigners, fakers, and fools. We must throw off these traits. We have reached a point where we are afraid to be kind to each other. Black men tell lies about black women. There's no foundation in truth. Black women tell the same thing about black men. There is no place for either one of us to go outside of each other, and there is no escape hatch, no place in the oppressor's camp or in the oppressor's home or in the oppressor's bed. All we've got is each other, and you make up your mind about that. That's all you're gonna get. Either we make it with each other or we don't make it. Remember, there was a time the world took its measure on what we did, and we gave out to the world the humane thought that stabilized them so that they could create something that they would one day call civilization. Today, teach your children to think beyond their present position. Teach them to look beyond slavery. Look at slavery, of course, examine it, of course, in all of its consequences. Then look beyond it. At independent states, we ruled exceptionally well. Then say to that young man and young woman, the people that did this had a mind, good intentions, commitment, and drive. You have the same thing if you apply it. And remember, one people can do it, another people can do it. And if we did it before, of course, it is time that we seriously consider we can do it again.
So, what do you guys think? Share your thoughts and opinions in the comment section below. Also, give this video a like for it to gain more viewers' attention, and also make sure to subscribe to this channel if you are new and want more videos like this. Until next time, peace out.